Us live on 0795 045 864 as we discuss diabetes. Today is actually World Diabetes Day, and the theme this year is breaking barriers and bridging gaps. We have been discussing this at length since 8 a.m. with Zara Mohammed, a clinical nutritionist, and let's get right into it. We have a few more minutes before we wrap up, so please get those questions in last minute as we wind up this conversation. Now, Zara, you know, as a nutritionist, what are some of the biggest challenges that people with diabetes face? What are some of the things that it's really just very hard to manage, and it takes a lot of time, a lot of patience, a lot of effort to be able to actually manage these things? I know cravings is one of them, but what else do people who have diabetes do wrong that should not be done, and then in turn that ends up being a challenge for them?
I think people just overall, you know, improving their you know, their intake, what they eat, as well as the time that they eat, because typically we tend to, you know, snack on, you know, different foods throughout the day and even late into the evening. So sort of having to bring in now that structure of, you know, breakfast, lunch, dinner. You know, these are things that maybe you should be a bit more careful about eating. This is what you should go for. Typically, for example, with the whole grain foods, it's not something that, you know, a lot of people would, you know, enjoy eating. And so, you know, getting into that routine, and also just, you know, accepting first of all the diagnosis of diabetes. It typically is, you know, also such a shock, and then now, you know, just the many changes, having to actually now be conscious about being active, setting aside time for physical activity. You know, all of these things tend to be challenging, you know, but with time they do catch up.
Right, Zara, let's talk about blood sugar levels, especially at night. And you mentioned something about the timings that, you know, you need to be consuming foods, and you need to be very specific, breakfast, lunch, dinner, but also eating early. So I saw this video and I thought it was very interesting about blood sugar levels and how even eating just something like a packet of crisps late at night, at around midnight, and how bad it is for you in comparison to eating that same packet of crisps, which is junk food, at around 7 p.m. and what it does for you, because when you're sleeping, obviously your insulin levels are at an all-time high because you're not moving, you're not really doing any sort of activity, which is why then the food is not being digested and not being burnt, right? In terms of breaking down the sugars in this particular pack of crisps, which is the carbs. So what would you like to recommend someone about when they should be eating? What is the right time to eat dinner, and why exactly should you avoid eating junk food and carbs, like a lot of carbs, especially at night?
So, you know, there's something we call the circadian rhythm.
Okay.
So the reason why we tell people to have, you know, dinner a couple of hours early before
bedtime,
before you go to bed, is because when nighttime comes, right, there's the hormone called melatonin that is produced, right?
Yes.
And so what happens is when melatonin is produced, for example, insulin, the secretion or the production of insulin actually goes down.
Yes.
So that explains why if you have that packet of crisps or whatever, when you have it at night, you know, your insulin levels, the production is actually low because your body knows that, you know, you shouldn't be eating at this time, right? It doesn't expect you to have any food or any nutrition coming in. And so that's why, you know, we really do not encourage snacking late into the night. So there's something we call an eating window, right? So like we talked about, having, you know, it's essentially a time where you have your first meal of the day and your last meal of the day.
Right.
And trying to be as consistent as possible with those timings. And actually what researchers have found is that even without an individual changing what they're eating particularly, you know, just by having a consistent eating window every single day, there is actually a reduction in inflammation, in weight as well, in cholesterol or lipid levels. You know, glucose levels are better controlled. So this is why, you know, timing is very, very important.
Very important. Okay, another question that's come in from Jimbo, who says, went to a chemist with a friend and the clinician spotted some tiny growths on my friend's neck and immediately asked him if he was diabetic. He responded to the affirmative. Are small growths on the skin also signs of diabetics?
Sometimes yes, but not necessarily. So like I said, sometimes the uncontrolled glucose levels will show up on your skin in the form of acne or eczema or, you know, the warts and whatnot. So there are, you know, individuals will have different manifestations, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you are diabetic.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it could be something else.
It could be something else, or it could just mean that, you know, maybe you need to, maybe your glucose levels are erratic. You're not diabetic, but they are erratic, and maybe, you know, you need to pay a bit more attention to what you're eating, or just generally to the way you're living.
Right. Thank you very much for that, Zara. And as we wind up, there's one more question that I wanted to ask personally, because I have heard that intermittent fasting is very beneficial for you, but you have mentioned how important breakfast is. So what exactly is the do's and don'ts when it comes to eating in the morning? You know, is it something that is recommended? Should you skip breakfast? Because back in the day, our parents, our forefathers, everyone would say breakfast is the most important meal of the day. But some people actually start eating at 1 p.m. So what exactly would you recommend is the right window to be eating your breakfast, or can you skip it?
Well, it really depends on the individual. So there are people who are not morning people, who just, you know, cannot have a meal at 8 a.m. It's too early. Typically, they'll have their first meal at like 11 or 12. So that's still okay. You know, just go with what works for you. Yeah, but as long as you are meeting your calorie needs, you're meeting your energy needs, your protein needs, really the time that you start, you know, eating is really, it's really varies person to person depending on your preferences.
Okay, and Zara, as I said, we are, I think, out of time now. So as we wind up, maybe you can give a parting shot about diabetes as a whole and how important it is to manage diabetes using food, nutrition, and what exactly the contribution is of food towards an individual and towards leading a healthy lifestyle.
So diabetes is, or rather nutrition and diet is really the cornerstone of prevention and management of not just diabetes, but many of these chronic diseases. It is one of the top risk factors, and it is a very important part of having, you know, good cardiometabolic health, or, you know, being able to, you know, stabilize your glucose levels. And I know that there's so much misinformation out there. There's so many conflicting you know, reports or articles, and so it can be very, very difficult for an individual. It can be very frustrating, understandably, when you see one thing and then you see the other thing. And so what I can say is, you know, reach out. I work at a hospital called Maya Kidney and Health Specialties Hospital, which is really a state-of-the-art hospital leading in the prevention, the treatment, as well as the management of these chronic diseases. And so for anyone watching, you can reach me on 0111 055 400 or 0716 170 170. So you can call any of those numbers and book a consultation with me, and I will be more than happy to, you know, clear up many of those myths and misconceptions.
All right, thank you very much, Zara. That was quite an informative session. We appreciate your time, your knowledge. I really feel like I've learned so much about food as well, courtesy of your knowledge and your in-depth experience when it comes to being a clinical nutritionist. So once again, we appreciate your time. And that brings us to the end of this particular segment right here on TV47. It's the Morning Cafe Show. I am Shiksha Arora. I'll be out of here, but don't go anywhere because entertainment continues. It's actually Fitness Thursday. So remember, food, diet, fitness. Zara has mentioned how important